What if the quiet man mopping floors at the Aikido Center wasn't just a janitor? And what if the billionaire black belt who challenged him was the one about to be disarmed, not by force, but by something far deeper? That's where this story begins. It was just past 9 a.m. when Lydia Tun stepped into the West Bridge Community Aikido Center, cedar floors polished, disinfectant faint in the air. She never announced her visits. She preferred to catch people unprepared. Today, in her navy blazer and perfect bun, worn gray work shirt, sleeves rolled, mop gliding across the tatami like it belonged there. His movements weren't clumsy. They were deliberate, fluid, almost martial. He didn't even look up when her shadow fell across him. "You're not a student here," she said. "I clean the place. Doesn't mean you can't learn. Ever sparred?" He looked up then, calm gray-blue eyes, steady, unreadable. "Only if you promise not to cry." The room stilled. Lydia didn't flinch, but the remark lodged somewhere between insult and intrigue. But the truth was she wanted to see him again, Jack Monroe. She spotted his son first, a quiet boy sketching in a corner. He handed Lydia a drawing. Her, standing alone in a dojo. Rain pouring above her head. It hit harder than it should have. She kept the picture. Over the next weeks, she saw Jack often, fixing vents, mopping floors, always calm, always present. 12 years. What happened? My wife fire collapse. I was first on scene. There was no self-pity in his voice. Just truth. She began noticing things. How he listened more than he spoke. How he carried himself like someone who knew real loss, but refused to collapse under it. When she asked him to help teach a special kids class, he shook his head. "I just fix things." Lucas, overhearing, whispered to her, "My dad teaches well. Grown-ups just don't listen." Lydia stopped pushing. Then came the day an older visiting instructor mocked Jack for mopping during her lesson. Jack stood, bowed slightly, and said, "I'm here to mop floors, not egos." He went back to work. Lydia didn't smile, but inside, something shifted. The paper cranes started appearing in her locker, folded by Lucas, each with a short message. "You don't need to be stronger, you just need to forgive." She kept them all. One night, a dream dragged her back to the mountain where her younger brother fell years ago, a hike she insisted on, the words she regretted, the guilt she buried. She woke shaking. The next morning, she arrived at the dojo before sunrise, sat with Lucas's latest crane in her hands, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Sam." Slowly, she stopped being the untouchable observer. She began training with Jack, not for rank, but for presence. They laughed during sparring, teased each other, learned to read more than just technique. Lucas became a constant between them, leaving drawings, the three of them on the mat, this time with Lydia's shadow faintly there. When a statewide Aikido event came, Lydia refused to take the stage. She spent the morning backstage with Jack, mopping hallways. A reporter later asked if she'd softened. Lydia only said, "This is the first time in my life I've bowed and not felt ashamed." Then Jack and Lucas vanished for 3 days. No drawings, no cranes. The absence felt wrong. On the fourth morning, Lydia found a folded page on the bench, Lucas's handwriting above 3 figures. Her, Jack, and a student. "You don't have to win. Just come back." That afternoon, Lydia knocked on Jack's door with a signed application, volunteer assistant instructor for the children's program. Lucas handed her a square of paper. "This is the part where you bow." She laughed, bowed, and Jack let her in. From then on, she trained quietly. No belt, no title. She learned to see fear before movement, to teach without pushing, to laugh when she fell. One afternoon, Jack said, "Aikido isn't about where the body is, it's about where the fear is." She believed him. When he finally asked her to spar again, it wasn't a test. It was a dance. Push, yield, counter, laugh. No winner, no loser. Lucas wandered in with paper fans he'd drawn for each of them. Lydia's had a mountain with a tiny climber. Jack's had a spiral. Lucas's showed 3 stick figures holding hands. Weeks later, during a quiet morning, Lydia walked onto the mat in a plain GI. Jack and Lucas turned. She bowed, deep, unhurried, from humility, not pride. Lucas placed a white paper crane in her hand. On its wing, "You cried, but this time it was to grow." Jack stepped forward. "Spar today." She smiled. "Only if you promise not to fall in love." "That's a dangerous promise," he said. I didn't ask you to make it. They moved together, not to prove, not to win, but to connect. And when they left the dojo that day, side by side, Lydia realized for the first time in her life. She wasn't falling behind. She was found. The leaves had begun to turn by the time Lydia noticed the shift, not in the air, but in herself. Mornings no longer began with conference calls. She left her phone in her locker, her calendar thinner, her steps slower. She didn't realize she'd traded urgency for presence until she caught herself kneeling on the mat beside Lucas, showing him how to fold a paper crane, both of them laughing when the wings came out crooked. Jack would glance over sometimes, smiling quietly, like he knew this was more important than anything she could have planned. Then came the letter. Not from the dojo, not from a client, from the city's community board. They were threatening to cut funding for youth programs, including the special needs Aikido class she'd grown attached to. Without it, the kids would lose their only safe space. He said, maybe it's about showing them why this matters. So they planned something different, a quiet demonstration, not in the big hall, not for the cameras, but for the people making the decision. The kids would train as usual. No speeches, no staged applause. On the morning of the meeting, Lydia stood at the far wall, watching the children stumble. Try again, smile when they got it right. Jack moved among them, adjusting a stance here, steadying a hand there, not like an instructor barking orders, but like someone planting seeds without needing to see the harvest. Lucas sat cross-legged in the corner, sketching. When it was over, the board members didn't clap. They didn't say much at all. But as they left, Lydia caught one of them slipping Lucas's latest drawing into her folder. 3 children on the mat, all smiling, with the words, "We're stronger here." 2 weeks later, the funding was renewed. No announcement, no credit, just a line in an email. And somehow, that felt like the biggest win of Lydia's career. That evening, she found Jack rolling up mats. "You knew this would work?" she said. Jack shrugged. "I knew it mattered." She stood there a moment before saying, "I used to think winning meant being seen. Now I think it's the opposite." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The first snow of the season fell the following week. Lydia arrived early, the dojo empty except for the muffled scrape of a broom. She set down her bag, stepped onto the tatami barefoot, and stood still. Jack appeared from the back room, Lucas behind him, carrying something wrapped in cloth. "For you," Lucas said softly. Inside was a small wooden box, carved with waves and mountains. She opened it to find all the cranes she'd ever been given. White, blue, yellow, each unfolded and flattened, pressed neatly inside. On top was one new crane, crimson paper, the fold sharp and clean. On its wing, in Lucas's uneven handwriting, "You came back." Lydia looked at Jack, then back at the crane. Her throat tightened. That day, they didn't spar. They didn't even speak much. They cleaned the mats, brewed tea, and sat together as the snow piled outside, the dojo warm and still. As the sun dipped, Lydia stood in the doorway, watching the white sky swallow the street. She turned to see Jack and Lucas framed by the golden light of the tatami, their silhouettes soft, steady. She knew then that some bonds weren't built in the heat of battle, but in the quiet after it. She left without saying goodbye, because some moments don't need endings. That night, in her penthouse, Lydia placed the crimson crane on the shelf, apart from the rest. No glass case, no spotlight, just there, waiting. The city glittered outside, but her eyes stayed on that small, folded shape, knowing it carried something she could never put into words. And somewhere in the city, a janitor, his son, and a dojo stood exactly as they were, unchanged to the world, but to her, everything.